Have you ever sat by your kitchen window, watching sunlight dance across the table, and realized the silence in your life has become louder than any sound? My name is Evelyn Harper, and for 22 years, the only constant in my world was the steady rhythm of waves against the rocks outside my cottage in Maine. Each morning, I'd fill the kettle, let steam rise from a chipped teacup, and wonder if anyone was thinking of me on the other side of that horizon. Loneliness, I found, has a way of making you invisible, even to yourself. Sometimes I'd trace my fingers along the faded wood of the dining table, remembering family dinners that felt both too long ago and somehow unfinished. Friends tell me that growing older means making peace with quiet moments. But what they don't say is how easily those moments can swell into entire afternoons, and then years spent waiting for a voice on the telephone or a card in the mailbox that never arrives. In America, we're taught that independence is a virtue. Stand on your own, build your life, and don't expect too much from anyone. Still, I learned there are days when even the strongest spirit longs to hear the word we. That's why when the phone rang one Thursday morning and my son Mason's name appeared on the screen, my heart leapt before I could catch it. We hadn't spoken for months, long enough for guilt to gnaw away at hope. His voice was brighter than I remembered, full of possibility and longing. He said he missed me. He said he wanted us to start again together, somewhere warm and full of promise. Costa Rica, Mom. He laughed as if he was inviting me to a childhood picnic where every day feels like a holiday. The word family glimmered between the lines, and I let myself believe just for a moment that the past could be rewritten. What no one tells you about loneliness is how quickly it can make hope feel like a lifeline. I packed my life into a single suitcase, leaving behind memories pressed between the pages of old books and the echo of my late husband's laughter still clinging to the walls. I told myself I was ready for adventure. That change was the first step toward healing. But a small, stubborn part of me wondered if I was simply following the sound of someone else's dream, afraid to admit that I had stopped dreaming my own. Before I locked the door to my cottage for what I thought might be the last time, I paused in the hallway, my hands resting on the banister, polished smooth by decades of coming and going. There, tucked behind a faded photograph of Mason, as a boy sat the family safe, a quiet secret I had kept out of habit and out of hope. I didn't tell Mason about it, not yet. Some things I believed were worth keeping close until you were sure of where you stood. With the keys in my pocket and a knot in my chest, I turned toward the unknown, trusting that sometimes the only way to find your voice again is to risk using it. The decision to leave everything behind came both suddenly and quietly, like the way spring snow melts without anyone noticing. For so many years, I told myself that my life was just fine as it was. I'd built routines strong enough to anchor me, learned to fill the emptiness with books and crosswords, convinced myself that missing my family was simply the price of growing older. But when Mason's voice filled my living room that morning, so eager, so full of promises, I realized how hungry I'd become for connection, even if it meant stepping out onto uncertain ground. Mason spoke of Costa Rica as if it were a new Eden, sunlit morning's laughter in the kitchen birthday cakes we'd missed celebrating together. He painted a picture of a life where no one would be left out or left behind. His wife Harper joined the calls, sometimes her voice soft and inviting. She'd talk about spare rooms and shared holidays, promising a sense of belonging that had started to feel foreign to me. In those moments, it was easy to forget how years of distance can build invisible walls and how hope sometimes wears the disguise of homecoming. I'm not alone in this kind of hope. One friend of mine, Ruth, sold her house in Nebraska at the urging of her daughter, who promised a place in their busy city home. At first, Ruth was enchanted. There were grandkids' drawings on the fridge and family dinners. But over time, Ruth began to feel more like a guest than family. careful not to overstay her welcome in the living room or kitchen. Her story taught me something I was just beginning to understand. Sometimes longing for connection makes us overlook the quiet boundaries that others have drawn. Still, I let myself believe. I said yes. I told Mason I would come, and I meant it with my whole heart. There's a special bravery in opening the door to new possibilities, even when you're not sure what waits on the other side. The lesson I carry now is, this hope can be a gift, but it asks you to walk with your eyes open. Moving toward family can heal old wounds, but it can also expose new ones if we're not careful with ourselves and with each other. As my plane touched down in their city, the landscape outside the window felt like a map of beginnings and endings. I stepped out into air that was warmer than home, my hands trembling with a mix of anticipation and worry. The thought crossed my mind was, I truly starting over? Or was I simply carrying the ache of old silences into new rooms? But I gathered my courage, held tight to the promise of us, and told myself that whatever waited behind their front door would be the next page of my story. I was ready to find out. The moment I stepped into Mason and Harper's apartment, a strange sense of both welcome and distance settled in my chest. The space was immaculate, shiny counters, the scent of lemon polish hanging in the air, not a single book out of place or cushion out of line. Yet for all its order, something felt missing. There were no photographs of family on the shelves, no evidence of messy everyday living. The walls echoed with the kind of silence that didn't invite you to speak, but rather reminded you to keep your voice soft, your footsteps lighter than you'd like. Harper greeted me with enthusiasm, her arms opening wide as if to draw me straight into a sitcom version of home. "We're so glad you're here, Evelyn," she said, her smile so bright it almost didn't reach her eyes. She walked me to a guest room with fresh linens and towels folded like origami, even a new robe neatly draped over the bed. On the surface, every gesture was thoughtful, but underneath, I felt as if I were a visitor to a museum, careful not to touch anything too long. In my heart, I yearned for a cluttered table or a stray mug, something that whispered family lives here. I remembered a story my neighbor Mary once shared. She moved in with her son after her husband passed, certain the arrangement would heal the ache of absence. But in her son's house, everything had its place. Coasters under every cup, remote controls, lined-up laughter kept to a minimum. Mary confided that despite being home, she felt less seen than ever before. Her experience reminded me that a perfect environment can sometimes be a mask for deeper distance, and that the truest sense of belonging rarely comes from tidy rooms or expensive candles. As I unpacked, Harper asked if I had brought important papers, passports, titles, insurance documents, offering to keep them safe for me just in case. Her words were gentle, but the request felt rehearsed, as though she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. I smiled and thanked her, but tucked my envelope deeper into my suitcase. A small lesson I learned both from Mary's story and my own instincts: when something feels off, it's all right to listen to your gut, even if you can't quite name the reason why. That night, as I lay on unfamiliar sheets, I told myself to give it time. Every new beginning feels awkward at first, I reasoned, but the house was quieter than any night on the Maine coast. Somewhere between the shadows and the hush, I promised myself to stay alert, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. The real test of trust, I realized, is not how quickly we give it, but how well we protect it as we move deeper into one another's lives. And with that thought, I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep the next day, already waiting just beyond the sunrise. In the days that followed, little things began to tug quietly at my attention. Harper was always close by, ready with a question or suggestion, yet her warmth seemed practiced, like the gentle tone someone uses with a stranger, not a loved one. Mason, too, was changed. He moved with a distracted energy, checking his phone, often rarely meeting my eyes for long. At dinner, conversation tiptoed around the past, and plans for the future always seemed to revolve around selling my cottage and moving somewhere sunnier, somewhere cheaper, somewhere new. My presence felt both important and strangely conditional. One afternoon, I noticed Harper lingering in the hallway as I put away my suitcase. She complimented my organization, then circled back to the question of important papers. "It's safer if we keep things together," she said softly. Her offer sounded reasonable, but something in her persistence made my old instincts stir. Years ago, as a legal secretary, I'd watched many families struggle with trust and temptation when money or property was involved. I learned that not every smile means safety, and sometimes the gentlest voices are rehearsed for a reason. I remembered a story from my time at the law office. An older gentleman, Mr. Clarkson, had moved in with his niece after a bad fall. She took care of his meals and appointments, but slowly began to manage his mail, his checkbook, and finally his house deed. By the time anyone noticed, she had sold his house out from under him, and he was left with nothing but regret. I never forgot the sadness in his eyes as he admitted he'd ignored small warning signs, each one so minor, so polite, until they became impossible to undo. These memories guided me now. I began to watch more closely the way Harper's smile flickered when I declined her help, how Mason grew tense whenever finances were discussed. I paid attention to the rhythms of the household, noting who locked doors, who moved things, when no one else was around. It wasn't about suspicion as much as it was about respect for myself and what I'd built over a lifetime. I realized that part of loving my family was loving myself enough to protect what mattered, even when it felt uncomfortable. That evening, I made a quiet promise as I prepared for bed. I would stay present, listen to my heart, and remember that wisdom comes not just from trusting others, but from honoring the small signals within. The next morning, as sunlight crept through the blinds, I felt both cautious and grateful. Life was asking me to pay attention to the people around me, to the lessons of the past, and to the value of my own intuition. With a deep breath, I opened the door to a new day, not knowing yet how much I would need all the awareness I could gather. One morning, I woke earlier than usual, the quiet in the apartment pressing down like an extra blanket. I padded down the hallway and found the kitchen empty, 2 coffee mugs on the counter, one still warm, the other already cold. Mason and Harper were nowhere to be seen, and their bedroom door stood open, the bed perfectly made. A strange heaviness settled in my chest. I checked my room and found my suitcase untouched, but the envelope I'd hidden beneath my clothes had been moved. It was the smallest detail, but it made every hair on my arm stand on end. Later that day, Mason returned alone, carrying groceries and wearing a smile that looked just a bit too careful. He asked how I was sleeping, if I was settling in. His questions floated above the surface, never diving deep. When Harper came home, she brought up my cottage again, how now was the perfect time to sell, how she had spoken to a friend who was a realtor, how they could handle everything for me. Their words dripped with concern, but the urgency underneath couldn't be ignored. I realized that sometimes the people who say they care the most may be holding out their hands for reasons you can't see. A neighbor in Maine, Mrs. Linton, once shared her own story with me. Her son convinced her to sell the family home and invest in a business opportunity, promising it was all for her comfort. Within months, the investment failed, the money was gone, and Mrs. Linton was left renting a room in a stranger's house. She told me the hardest part wasn't the financial loss, but the breaking of trust, how it left a scar much deeper than missing dollars or empty rooms. As I watched Mason and Harper move around me, I wondered how many small signs I had chosen not to see. Sometimes we ignore what's inconvenient or uncomfortable, hoping that love will be enough to keep us safe. But as I thought about Mrs. Linton and about my own instincts, I knew that safety comes not from denial, but from facing hard truths with gentle courage. Protecting yourself, I realized, is not a sign of mistrust, but a form of respect for your past, for your future, and for the life you've built. That night, I lay awake, staring at the lines of light on the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant city sounds. I thought of my cottage by the sea and the quiet wisdom it had taught me. There is a difference, I now understood, between being cautious and being fearful. With that lesson resting quietly in my heart, I promised myself that whatever came next, I would meet it with both open eyes and an open heart. Dawn was already beginning to color the edge of the sky as I drifted into a lighter, more watchful sleep, ready for the day that waited just beyond the horizon. In every life, there are moments when suspicion turns to certainty. The morning I discovered my secret safe was missing from the guest room, my fears crystallized into reality. No note was left, no trace of Mason or Harper, just the echo of footsteps and an emptiness where trust had once lived. My suitcase was still there, my clothes untouched, but the quiet in the apartment felt final. I stood for a long time in the doorway, holding the memory of their promises in my hands, and realized the line between hope and heartbreak can be heartbreakingly thin. That sense of loss was not just about possessions, but about the story I had told myself that family, no matter how distant or divided, would always choose love in the end. I remembered a woman I met in a support group years ago, Mrs. Radley. Her son had convinced her to put his name on the deed to her house, just in case, assuring her it was for her own good. Months later, she found herself evicted and her trust shattered. She told our group that the hardest thing was forgiving herself for believing in someone she wanted so badly to trust. As I returned to my own cottage by the Maine shore, I let the familiar salt air remind me of what was real. The house was just as I'd left it, the second safe still hidden behind the panel in the closet untouched. All my important documents, the small coins I'd collected, even the savings bonds and the emergency cash waited quietly in the dark. I felt relief, but also a bittersweet ache. My carefulness had protected me, but it had also built walls ones I didn't even know I was keeping up. It's easy to look back and wonder whether you were too cautious or not cautious enough. The lesson that settled in my bones that day was this: being prepared is not the same as being distrustful. It's a way of loving yourself, of honoring your story, your work, your journey. People like Mrs. Radley and like me don't lose faith in others, but we do learn to trust ourselves more deeply. Life will always bring risk and change, but wisdom grows in the space where self-respect and hope meet. As I closed the safe and returned the panel to its place, I paused and let myself breathe out the pain, the anger, and the disappointment. I was home, and that meant something maybe more than it ever had before. The next day would bring questions, healing, and the slow work of building trust again, both in others and in myself. For now, I let the steady tick of the living room clock comfort me, ready to step gently into whatever came next. Coming home after betrayal was not the relief I expected. My cottage held all the familiar shapes, my worn teacup, the creaky floorboard near the pantry, but everything seemed to echo with questions I hadn't asked in years. I found myself sitting in the hallway with a box of old photos, looking at Mason's childhood smile, remembering school plays and bedtime stories. Each memory was sharp and sweet, but also laced with doubt. Had I loved too much or not enough? Was there a point where giving becomes enabling? Or does a mother's heart simply not recognize that line until it's crossed? I thought about conversations with friends in town, women like Mrs. Bartlett, whose daughter rarely called, except when she needed help paying bills. Sometimes Mrs. Bartlett confided, "I wish I'd set boundaries sooner, before love became expectation." Her story felt painfully close to my own. Many parents, especially as they grow older, hope that love will be enough to hold families together. But in truth, boundaries are acts of love too, protecting not only ourselves, but teaching our children what respect truly looks like. These lessons, I realized, are often learned too late when loss has already settled in. It's tempting after heartbreak to rewrite the story, with blaming ourselves for our trust, or blaming our children for their choices. I remembered my own mother's quiet wisdom, her way of listening more than speaking. She used to say, "Don't close your heart, just close the door when you need to." There's comfort in knowing that each generation wrestles with these same questions, learning and unlearning as they go. The greatest mistake is not loving at all, but sometimes the next greatest is loving without listening to our own needs. A small lesson I carry now is to reflect honestly but gently. Looking back, I can see both the beauty and the blindness in the choices I made for Mason. Regret, I've learned, is not always the enemy, it can be a teacher too. I've met many in my community who carry the same complicated love, the same longing for second chances. We share our stories at the local cafe, swapping laughter and tears, discovering together that healing is possible, even if it takes time and courage. That afternoon, I placed the old photos back into their box, closed the lid, and sat quietly as sunlight poured through the window. The ache in my heart was softer now, shaped by understanding instead of grief. I knew that I could not change the past, but I could choose to live the next chapter with more intention and kindness for myself and for the people who would walk into my life from here on out. In that gentle promise to myself, I felt the first glimmer of hope returning, guiding me toward the next unexpected connection. A few weeks after settling back into my quiet cottage, a soft knock at the door changed the rhythm of my days. Standing on the porch was Zoe, the young woman who had moved in next door just before my world turned upside down. With bright eyes and an open smile, she introduced herself again, this time holding a plate of homemade scones and an offer to help with my garden. Her kindness was simple and genuine, arriving not with questions about my past, but with an invitation to share a cup of tea and a bit of conversation in the afternoon sun. As we sat together beneath the maple tree, our stories began to unfold in gentle turns. Zoe, just 27 and studying for the bar exam, spoke about her dreams of becoming an advocate for seniors in the community, helping those who might not have anyone else. I told her pieces of my own story, not the heartbreak, but the joys, the years I spent teaching, the travels with my late husband, the way the ocean's voice had comforted me in lonely times. In her presence, I felt the simple warmth of being seen without judgment or expectation. Zoe shared a story about her grandmother who had lived independently until her late 80s, refusing help from anyone until a neighbor became a friend. Sometimes the best family is the one you find by chance, Zoe said, her eyes shining with gentle humor. Her words resonated with me. I realized how easy it was to retreat after betrayal, to close doors, and build walls in the name of protection. But healing often comes through unexpected connections, through opening the heart again just a little and letting someone new step inside. I thought of other women in our town who had found friendship across generations, the retired librarian who now tutored Zoe in history, the widower who fixed bikes for neighborhood kids. These relationships, small at first, became lifelines for both the young and the old. They reminded me that while family can disappoint, community can heal. The lesson grew clear. It's never too late to make room for someone new, or to become that someone new in another's story. As Zoe helped me plant a row of tulip bulbs in the fading afternoon light, I felt gratitude settle in my bones. I understood that while the wounds of the past may never fully disappear, hope can return. In simple ways, a friendly visit, a shared laugh, a new friendship blooming in spring soil. That evening, as I washed our teacups and watched Zoe wave goodbye from the gate, I sensed my world growing wider, the horizon brightening for whatever or whoever might come next. With Zoe's encouragement, I decided to take a step I'd long put off. One morning, she accompanied me to meet with a local attorney, a woman known for her kindness and plain-spoken advice. Sitting in that sunlit office, I explained my story from the heartbreak with Mason and Harper to my cautious hope for the future. The attorney listened without judgment, then helped me create a living trust. Together, we structured my estate so it would not only protect my home and assets, but also support a small fund for seniors in our town who faced similar challenges. The process, while practical, felt surprisingly empowering. Zoe volunteered to help with the paperwork, reading each line carefully and asking questions I hadn't thought of. Her presence reminded me how vital it is to have someone truly in your corner, especially when navigating the unfamiliar. I remembered stories from our church group friends who'd lost property or savings because they trusted blindly or were simply too weary to fight. The difference I realized was not just in legal documents, but in having a trustworthy support system. Even when our family lets us down, help can come from unexpected places, if only we're willing to reach out and accept it. We celebrated signing the final papers with coffee and fresh muffins at a local bakery. Zoe laughed, teasing that one day you'll tell me all your secrets. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The experience wasn't only about safeguarding the past. It was about reclaiming agency and believing my story still mattered. The lesson that settled with me was simple, yet profound. No matter our age or circumstance, we can choose to rewrite the narrative, set healthy boundaries, and say yes to support that is genuine. In the weeks that followed, I met more people whose lives were changed by simple acts of advocacy. A retired teacher who started a book club after losing her savings to a scam now had a network of friends who looked out for one another. An elderly widower joined a community gardening group and discovered neighbors who treated him like family. These real-life examples showed me that sometimes justice isn't just found in courtrooms, but in the daily work of caring for ourselves and each other, of speaking up and standing strong together. On a rainy Thursday, as Zoe and I finished organizing the last folder for my trust, I looked around my home and felt a soft gratitude. Life had changed shape, but it wasn't empty. It was just waiting to be filled anew. I realized the power in forging new connections, in asking for help, and in choosing to honor my boundaries while still keeping my heart open. As evening fell, I knew I was finally ready to embrace whatever the next day would bring, surrounded by a community I could trust, and a friendship that felt like family. Looking back, I see how each step, leaving my quiet cottage, risking trust again, facing heartbreak, and finding friendship, became a thread in the new tapestry of my life. The journey wasn't about moving somewhere warmer or chasing a vision of perfect family. It was about discovering courage in the face of loss and learning that boundaries are a form of love. I learned that while hope can be fragile, it can also be the first light after the storm, leading us toward new beginnings, if we dare to reach for it. Through Zoe's kindness and the support of my new community, I found the strength to protect my story and share it honestly. We can't always choose what happens to us, but we can choose how we heal. Real connection doesn't always come from where we expect. Sometimes it arrives as a neighbor with homemade scones or a gentle nudge to try again. I saw firsthand that healing isn't the same as forgetting. It's the quiet work of letting go, forgiving ourselves, and allowing new people and new hope into our lives. If my story echoes something in your heart, know that you're not alone. Maybe you've lost trust, faced betrayal, or wondered if the best years are behind you. I promise there's always a chance for renewal. Whether you're mending fences, forging new friendships, or simply finding the courage to ask for help, your journey matters. The scars we carry are not signs of weakness, but reminders that we have lived and learned and are still open to joy. Thank you for sharing these moments with me. If you found comfort or inspiration here, please consider subscribing to my channel, leaving a comment about your own story, or sharing this video with someone who might need it. Every word and every new connection helps build a community where no one has to walk through heartache or healing alone. Let's keep the conversation going. I can't wait to read your stories and walk alongside you one gentle, hopeful step at a time.